Congratulations for being here today and letting us quiz you. My name is Susan Firestone. I'm a retired patent and trademark attorney, and I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
I'm Mike Miles from Birmingham, Alabama. I told another team from Nevada the other day that we intend on being extremely nice and sweet to you because Kathleen told us if we didn't, she'd come to our house and beat the daylights out of us. So we're going to be so nice to you today. We love her. We're going to love you in about 20 minutes. Looking forward to it.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Taubman. I'm a senior judge on the Colorado Court of Appeals in Denver, Colorado.
And if you can introduce yourselves and your teacher, please.
Good afternoon, judges. We are Reno High Unit 3, and we are coming to you from the University of Nevada. My name is Grant Yu, and I will be attending the University of Michigan.
Good afternoon. My name is Maya Bullier, and I will be attending the University of California.
Good afternoon, judges. My name is Rachel Christensen, and I will be attending the University of Southern California.
Good afternoon. My name is Amaya Stanley, and I will be attending the University of Nevada.
Good afternoon. I'm Natalie Mastic, and I will be attending the University of Nevada. Our unit coach is Mr. Matthew Oakes, and our teacher is Mr. Richard Clark.
Thank you. We have question number 1 for you this afternoon. The right to vote was not expressly included in the U.S. Constitution of 1987. In your opinion, was the implied right to vote in the Constitution sufficient for the creation of a representative democracy? How did the expansion of voting rights affect the evolution of democracy in our country? Please give examples. And which is the greater threat to democracy, disenfranchisement or fraud? Explain your position, and you may begin.
I'm speaking as a victim of this American system. I don't see any American dream. I see an American nightmare. Just as Malcolm X described the nightmare the civil rights movement had become in his speech, The Ballot or the Bullet in 1964, the founding dream of a representative democracy in America also turned into a nightmare of disenfranchisement.
The implied right to vote was exploited by states through Article 1, Section 4 to restrict suffrage only to white property-owning men. And the 3/5 clause placed an explicit restriction on the representation of Black men. If the framers had codified the right to vote, it would have only extended to white property-owning men.
Article 5's 20 years clause and equal Senate suffrage clause show that the framers had the power to restrict suffrage on a national level. Since the right to vote was not enumerated in the Constitution and therefore not explicitly restricted on a federal level, states were the largest factor of enfranchisement.
The 1828 election was the first federal election in which most states allowed non-property owning white men to vote. Wisconsin expanded voting to Black men in 1866, and Wyoming gave women the right to vote in 1869. These minuscule advancements on suffrage highlighted how the federal government needed to realize the dream, beginning with the ratification of the 14th Amendment.
Nightmares of disenfranchisement remained, and many groups were not represented in the 14th Amendment. In 1873, Congress passed the Comstock Act, which defined contraceptives as obscene and illicit. This act stripped women of their voice to have autonomy over their body, regardless of marital status.
The first Reconstruction only lasted 14 years, ending with the election of 1876 and the mass disenfranchisement of Black men through Jim Crow laws. The Dawes Act of 1887 redistributed Native Americans' lands without their consent, echoing the language of Article 1, Section 2, and the 14th Amendment, Section 2, which excluded Indians not taxed.
The expansion of voting rights began to quell the nightmare through the 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendments. The Snyder Act of 1924, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the 24th Amendment protected access to the polls. 27 African Americans were elected to Congress by 1880 following the 15th Amendment. 1 year after the 19th Amendment's ratification, women's political groups passed the Shepherd-Towner Maternity and Infancy Act.
Slowly, the nightmare shifted from disenfranchisement to perceived voter fraud. Allegations of criminal fraud have been greatly exaggerated. In a study done by the Brennan Center for Justice in 2017, the overall voter fraud rate was found to be less than 0.01%. 1/3 of Americans today still believe the 2020 election was fraudulent.
This has resulted in targeted disenfranchisement through suppressive voter ID laws in 36 states and task forces that intimidate voters, such as the Office of Election Crimes and Security in Florida. Partisan gerrymandering is another form of civil voter fraud because it gives people the illusion their vote matters, and it is still allowed through Rucho versus Common Cause and Limon versus Benesek.
The American dream has been partially realized. In 2020, Nevada re-enfranchised 77,000 felons, and the 2020 election saw the highest voter turnout in over a century. But the American nightmare persists. In Washoe County, Nevada, it has taken 92 years to protect Native Americans' access to polling stations through Sagaski versus Sanchez. In 1935, Langston Hughes' poem recognized that the American dream still remained an empty promise.
Except the dream that's almost dead today. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has yet been and yet must be, the land where every man is free. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some questions for you. You've talked a bit about gerrymandering. Are there any advantages to gerrymandering? And if so, what are they?
One example of gerrymandering that is an advantage is gerrymandering on the basis of geography. For example, in Nevada, in Reno, we have a very, very different political climate than in Las Vegas, whereas in Las Vegas, 3 out of 4 of our congresspeople are from Las Vegas. And as such, this gerrymandering allows us in Reno to have representation, and as well as the rest of the more rural Nevada.
Thank you.
There was something in during the Nevada state finals, one of the students was talking about that he lived in a part of the state where his family had to drive some huge amount, like 50 or 60 miles to a polling place. Is that true? And if am I remembering that right? And if that's true, is that an unintentional act of voter suppression, or was it intentional in the first place?
Our state has definitely dealt with inadequate polling stations being provided for people. In the court case Sagaski versus Sanchez, it was noted that there was not a polling station on a Native American reservation. And so these Native Americans were not able to get their vote properly out.
One solution to this could be implementing a law like they have in India, where there is a requirement that there must be a polling station within a half mile of every citizen. So there's one person that lives out in the middle of the jungle, and they take up polling stations that it's within a half mile of him to increase access to polls for everyone.
Nevada has been working to fix this issue. Over COVID, Nevada expanded their mail-in ballot access, as well as increasing their early voting range to 2 weeks before Election Day. So this helps increase the amount of availability people have to vote in Nevada.
Judge Talman, may I follow up with that before I yield? Is that all right? So the cases that you described, over the last 2 days, you've had a question about voting rights. You're getting it for the second time today, but you've also had a day of equal protection under the law. And there were 2 different questions, but I don't know how you can separate them. If in my case, convicted felons who have served their time can't vote, but in Illinois, they can. If Georgia has same-day voting and Mississippi doesn't. If the person that lives on the Indian reservation in Nevada lives 65 miles from a place that he or she can vote. Does the Constitution fail in its promise to each one of those people for equal protection under the law, as long as they allow the states to create conditions like that?
It does not fail, because while Article 1, Section 4 does give states the time, place, and manner to set their voting, it also allows the federal government to regulate any actions that do suppress voting. And by giving states their own power to choose how to vote, we're able to create a laboratory democracy and allow for new, more efficient methods of voting that are more in with the modern times, such as mail-in ballots.
It is not the Constitution itself that has failed, but rather the government. For example, in 2013, Shelby County v. Holder ruled that Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act was unconstitutional, which has banned the federal oversight requirement for any state voting law changes. And this has resulted in many suppressive voter ID laws, and also the restriction of early access registration, and as you mentioned, the restriction of many polling stations.
One way that the federal government has stepped in to increase equal protection was an amendment made in 1975 to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, in which it requires that any given area where the population has more than 5% of a minority speakers, they require you to have a bilingual ballot.
Okay, thank you. That's good info. Thank you.
So you mentioned several times that there have been restrictive voting laws that have been enacted in recent years. Given the time, place, and manner provision of Article 1, Section 4, are there provisions regarding regulating elections that you think are appropriate?
The concept of judicial review is very important in regulating unjust voting laws. For example, in 1910, Oklahoma amended their state constitution, adding Article 3, Section 4A, known as the Grandfather Clause, which disproportionately impacted Black voters. And so it wasn't until the 1915 case, Ginn v. United States, that judicial review was able to overturn this to make voting more accessible and equitable for all citizens.
However, there's also pieces of legislation that are appropriate because they protect access to vote. For example, in Nevada, we have something called the Voters' Bill of Rights, which makes it so it's illegal for poll watchers to intimidate, threaten, or coerce any voters in line, and also guarantees a replacement ballot if a citizen loses one.
Additionally, in Article 1, Section 4, there is the time, place, and manner clause, but there is also the federal oversight clause. And this means that the federal government does have oversight over these issues, and as such, they can pass legislation, for example, updating the Bill of Rights updating the Voting Rights Act in order to renew their federal oversight requirement that was stripped in Shelby County.
I come from a state of Indiana, which has really low voter turnout. And these people are all registered voters. They just don't show up at the poll. Can you see any reason why that would be and how you would remedy that?
One reason voters may choose not to vote is because they do not feel represented by their ballot. One way to help remedy this is the none of the above option. Nevada is currently the only state that offers this on some ballot measures. But places like Spain, Norway, and parts of Canada offer this. And the main difference between this option and choosing not to vote is that it gives voters an explicit way of describing that they don't feel represented by the candidates rather than just having an ambiguous decision not to vote.
Another way that we could remedy this is to increase our civic education. Nevada has just cut down their civic education so that next year only half a year of civic education is required, and this should not be allowed. We should be required to attend a full year of civic education so we understand why voting is so important and why we must participate in our democracy.
One of the reasons that people may choose not to vote is because they don't feel truly represented by the Electoral College. For example, in Florida, it takes approximately 536,000 votes to amount to one electoral vote, whereas in Wyoming, it only takes 144,000 votes. So many people choose not to because they don't feel representative. And a solution to this would be to do something like Maine does, where they split their electoral college votes in accordance with how many people voted for which candidate. So if 1/3 of the people voted for the Democrat, then 1/3 of the votes go to that. So they're not completely discounting those people.
Since you brought up the Electoral College, y'all have kept me up late the last 3 presidential elections. Y'all have kept me up half the night waiting to see what Nevada was going to do. If they abolish, you really have. If you abolish, and then I would know who would win and I could go to bed, but you made me wait. If they abolish the Electoral College, would that, and I don't think they will, but if they did, would that help Nevada by getting turnout up, or would it hurt Nevada by making it less important to the 2 candidates to come through and campaign?
It would absolutely hurt Nevada because the Electoral College is able to protect the rights of small states by guaranteeing at least some number in the overall election to them. And if we get rid of it, then the election would basically be done by the time California, Texas, and Florida get their votes out, because population based, they make up about 1/4 of the entire country.
Realistically, the Electoral College only is in place for one position, the presidency. And as such, if we were to abolish the Electoral College, small states such as Nevada would still have equal representation in the Senate, which is more than enough to account for this disparity.
I disagree with my colleagues. I think that abolishing the Electoral College would actually help Nevada, because a lot of times people feel as though their vote will not count if they are not within the giant majority of their state. For example, a more extreme version of this can be seen in California in the comparison of Northern California versus Southern California. And so if we were to abolish the Electoral College, this would allow for people to feel as though their one vote is more representative.
Thank you very much.
We don't have very much time, but can you tell me whether you think felons should be allowed to vote?
Felons should be allowed to vote as they are counted in the census. So often those people that are in prison, the power of their vote gets turned to the rural area that doesn't truly represent them. In Vermont, for example, felons are able to vote for the entirety of like 18 and on. So even while they're incarcerated, whereas in Nevada, it's only restored after you're released from prison.
Fine.
Thank you very much. Good job.
Very good job. Thank you, students. And now the judges will provide some feedback.
You want to, should we have the judge start?
Why not?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
You know, I appreciate your giving me the opportunity to comment first, and that gives the other judges the opportunity to say, oh, I agree wholeheartedly with what the judge said, no matter what I said. So,
We do agree.
We do. We agree.
but I appreciate that. I think that you had a good historical recitation in your opening statement. And I was glad to see that you mentioned the Jim Crow laws. We have seen a lot of teams that have not mentioned the Jim Crow laws as having limited the right to vote after the Civil War. You mentioned the 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendments, and also the 24th Amendment. And I appreciate seeing that. You talked about the importance of the possibility of mail-in ballots, and Colorado is one state that provides for mail-in ballots, and it's led to a very high number or percentage of eligible voters voting. So I was glad to see that you mentioned that. And I was glad that you mentioned Shelby, and you're the first team that we've heard today that's mentioned the 1975 amendment to the Voting Rights Act. And so I was glad to see that. And you were talking about it would be good to increase civic education requirements. And I expected you to say, well, the We the People program is so wonderful, it should be required throughout the United States for everybody over the age of 3. But I'm glad that you mentioned the importance of civic education. Seriously, that's something that more states, I think, would benefit from having a civic education requirement. And then finally, I like the fact that you had different views on whether abolishing the Electoral College would be helpful or harmful to Nevada. So very good job. Congratulations on your presentation today.
Gosh, Susan, I thought that was good. We can leave now, right?
Yeah, we can leave now. We're done. We agree.
That's right. We certainly do. I can't tell you how good I thought that was. And Natalie, opening and closing with those quotes, those were two very, very, very different individuals you were quoting there. And it's interesting that that you open and close with it, because I think it was a bracket. I think everything you talked about that leaned toward either one of those quotes or the other. And I'm afraid that still in 2022, 240 something years after some of these guarantees were given to us, in the 150 years since the Reconstruction Amendments, there are a lot of people that still feel like that first quote. And even if there's a legal reason for that condition to exist in that spot, I don't know that it's good. I don't know that it's a credit to our country that 240 years and then 150 after the Civil War, we still have people that have a legitimate right in some places to feel that disenfranchised. I think we still have work to do. I think Nevada's gone a lot farther than a lot of states have. I think just about every state has gone farther. Dan, not only did they give me Shelby v. Holder 3 or 4 times, but they give me Jim Crow laws. Who do you think of when you bring up Jim Crow laws? Alabama. Thanks a lot, you people. I really appreciate that. But I think the quotes were perfect for the discussion we had this afternoon, and I was uplifted by it. And I do wish that at least there would be civic education for everyone your age. And Rachel, I do wish it could last a whole year, because if it does as much good for everybody else as it has obviously benefited the 5 of you, if everybody could see that, they would want that. And the fact that you have teachers that are as wonderful as you have makes it even better for you. You understand this stuff now, so don't rest. Don't think you're finished with this. Go figure out how to make it better. Call Judge Talman and he'll send you a contribution, a campaign contribution when you get reviewed. Thank you. Susan?
I too really enjoyed our time together. It's very, very enjoyable to learn what you know and how much you know. It's just truly fun. I like the fact that you actually talked about 1828, although you did hide it was during Andrew Jackson's term, and which I'm always shocked that this happened with Andrew Jackson's terms. But then you mentioned the Wisconsin allowing, black men to vote, and then you mentioned Wyoming allowing women to vote, and you took us really through the history to now, where all of a sudden now we have, and it's the way the question is structured, but it also works out the way you set it up is, we're slowly gaining rights to vote, and now we're starting to take them away. And so you see, it's almost like I felt like that. It was a nice structure. And I said, it's probably coincidental, but it worked out very well. And I also like the introductory and the ending quotes, but very much. So I thought you did a job well done, and thank you very much. And you deserve another round of applause.
You do.
As
Thank you,
does your
judges.
teacher.